As always, there are many breaking stories in the news that have to do with the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. However, we had the opportunity to have a very special guest with us on the program today, Rabbi Daniel Lapin, and I felt like you would really enjoy hearing from this man. He is the president of the American Alliance of Jews and Christians. I am an avid supporter of the Jewish people. I've been to Israel every year since 1993, leading the tour there every year. I love the nation of Israel. If I was not called to the United States of America, then I would want to be in Israel. So it's my privilege today to welcome to Politics and Religion, Rabbi Daniel Lapin. Welcome, Rabbi.
Well, hello. Thank you very much indeed for having me as a guest. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, thank you for being on with us, and I'm really fascinated about what you're doing because I believe there is a relationship between Jews and Christians that should really be strengthened and emphasized. A lot of times I think some Jews may not understand why evangelical Christians support them so strongly, and then we do have Christians who do not support the Jewish people, especially some that are maybe not labeled evangelical Christians. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding sometimes. I've heard some Jews that are very thankful, very gracious. I've heard others that are a little bit asinine, frankly, toward some Christianity. I know that you know this better than I do. But anyway, I thought because of that it would be really good to have this program today and to have you on to help us to understand better the relationship between Jews and Christians.
Well, you're right, and I think where it begins is exactly how you opened the show by pointing out that there is not an impenetrable titanium-reinforced wall between politics and religion. There just isn't. And as a matter of fact, I think it helps if we always remember that politics is nothing more than our most deeply held religious and moral values made practical. That's all it is.
I think the politicians of the world have come to understand that they cannot not ignore religion because religion really determines what we believe. It really is more closely held than even our political beliefs most of the time. So
well, much of the time, it's the political that flows from the religious. It's not the other way around. For instance, religious churches in America can receive tax-free gifts. That isn't because politics said so. It's the other way around. It's because America has a deep-rooted connection with its churches and with its Christianity that made the politicians fall into line and make donations to churches to be tax-exempt. That's why it's religion that shapes politics. It's not politics that shapes religion.
Rabbi, you especially emphasize a lot of times Judeo-Christian values. Now, that was a common term in my younger years, but it seems like over the last 10 or 15, 20 years, there's a lot of people, you say the term Judeo-Christian values, their eyes sort of glaze over. It's like they really don't even know what you're talking about anymore. So I thought it would be good if you would define what you mean by the promotion of Judeo-Christian values. What are they, first of all, and what can we do to promote that, and why is that so important for America and for our world today?
Well, that's a big question, and I'm really pleased you asked it. The Judeo-Christian values, or if you like, Judeo-Christian biblically based values, same thing, are the values that shaped the only civilization the world has ever known. Now, what I mean by that is that obviously there are many cultures in this vast and varied world of ours. There are hundreds of cultures, but there really are not hundreds of civilizations. There's only one civilization. A civilization is a place where voting replaces violence. It's a place where women are safe and respected, where women have rights. It's a place where the struggle for daily survival has gone beyond a sustenance peasant struggle, and an economy has emerged. It's a place where value is placed on human life. And all of these things have sprung from the pages of the Bible in what we call Western civilization. And Western civilization has triumphed. It is the choice of the whole world. Today, you can take a look at bathrooms or banking systems in Beijing or Bombay or Bangkok, and they have copied both the bathrooms and the banking systems of Berlin and Baltimore and Boston. In other words, nowhere in Western civilization did people say, we like the sewerage systems they use in India, I think we'll copy them. That never happened. The rest of the world copied the West. And similarly with economic systems, the rest of the world copied the West. To put it directly, no indigenous capital market ever grew up in a non-Christian nation. So today there are stock markets in Singapore and in Lagos and in every other major city of the world, but that's all relatively recently. That's all 20th century development as little by little the rest of the world caught up with what Judeo-Christian biblical values built in the West. And I think it's just really important to understand that. So once we understand that it is precisely these Bible values that created civilization, and once we see that the rest of the world desires it, I mean, after all, no non-Christian rooted country has an illegal immigration problem. People are not trying to come to countries that are not rooted in Christendom. Once we see the success of what was built by Judeo-Christian biblical values, then we have a little bit of a sense of what it is that works and perhaps what needs to come back sometime in the near future.
Let's drill down a little bit on this subject because it is so fundamental and so important. You know, our government is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It's not a government of the government, by the government, for the government, but it is self-government, actually. Some of our founding fathers said the best possible government is the least possible government. And I think one of our founders said that that unless a nation embraces Judeo-Christian values, that the ideal of freedom and democracy simply cannot work, because Christians and Jews alike would teach that a person should control themselves and behave properly because of their love and fear of God. But when you take away the God element, then the only thing to restrain a society is government. So once government has to constrain us rather than we constrain ourselves, then government has to become ever bigger, ever more heavy-handed. So what I'd like for you to address right now, Rabbi, is give us some specifics that must be embraced. And if we lose those specifics, if you can do this off the top of your head, if we lose those specifics, then will our form of government quit working?
You're saying some Judeo-Christian specifics.
Yes. For example, such things as love your neighbor as yourself. If we ever become a self-centered, selfish people, then the government's going to have to move in.
Well, I think there are others that are less known than love your neighbor as yourself, or more specifically, don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. But, for instance, one of the very basic questions that has to be looked at, and an easy way of doing it is to sort of play along with a little thought experiment. You know, imagine you were starting your own new nation. You know, imagine that you were a high school teacher. And you remember Gilligan's Island from years ago?
Yes, I do.
Well, imagine a sort of large-scale Gilligan's Island where you're taking 50 or 100 high school students on a trip, and you all get marooned on a desert island, and let's, for the purpose of our little thought experiment, let's stipulate that you're not going to be rescued for 10 years. You've now got to create a little functioning mini society. And one of the very first questions you're going to have to decide, and it's far from an obvious question, because we know, for instance, that the Pilgrims, when they arrived in Plymouth, actually had to make this decision as well, because they were setting up their own new little society in a new world, and they actually made a mistake on this, and then they had to go back and redo it. But here's your basic question, which as the only adult with a group of 50 high school students, you've got to decide. And that is, that very first day on the island, you're going to sort of send people out to find out what the food situation, that's your most urgent need. Is there going to be food and water to eat and drink? And you'll send your students out, and some will come back and say, well, there might be fish in the lagoon, and some will say, well, we found some, high up in the hills, we found some vegetables, and somebody else says we found some trees with some edible fruit on it. And what you're going to have to decide pretty soon is, do people eat what each person finds, or do people put everything in a big pile in the middle and everybody eats together? That's the question you've got. In other words, you're going to have to decide the role of private property. And what you might discover is that while on the surface it seems rather nice to have everybody put all the food on a big pile in the middle and everybody settles down to have dinner together, you're quickly going to discover that high school students, being what they are, just like any other human beings, there are going to be a lot of slackers among them. And little by little, that pile is going to get smaller. As the days go by, the amount of food collected is going to get smaller and smaller, as some of the less diligent among the group will discover they get to eat the same whether they work hard during the day or not. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes. And
the Pilgrims went wrong on this, and they starved the first year because everything was communal, and nobody, little by little, people stopped working. And William Bradford and the others quickly decided they have to switch to private plots of land for each individual, for each family, actually. And from then onwards, there was abundance. So we've really got to ask ourselves whether God in his wisdom gave us a blueprint which says nobody has a right to your property, or whether we're going to say everybody joins in together. And
excellent.
Therein lies one of the keys to civilization. We can come back to that whenever you want.
We're up against our first break, Rabbi. You're listening to Rabbi Daniel Lapin, and we will be back in a moment.